All right, can you hear me? All right, good. I'm Jim Tuedio. I'm Dean of the College of the Arts, Humanities, and Social Sciences, and I've been coordinating social justice in the Central Valley conferences now for half a dozen years. It seems like each year we kind of feel the osmosis of the problems that are really kind of at the forefront of attention, but maybe not engaging people as much as they really probably need to for us to really understand how do we kind of cultivate a social response or a societal response. So we get caught kind of hearing about the problems, but not really seeing the kind of engagement with the solution making that I think we kind of aspire to when we're thinking about spending time thinking about the problems. Because if you think about the problems, it takes a lot out of us, really, because they touch people's lives in very, very dramatic ways on an individual level, but it permeates the society and it creates a lot of tension, anxiety, and disaffection. We see it in our political processes, obviously, but it's kind of, that's a symptom. And we have to remember that that's also kind of a mirror back on us about the things that we're wrestling with socially. So this year we decided that we should bring some attention to the learning environments that students are in, whether they're in pre-K or kindergarten or elementary school or secondary school, or even if they're in a college setting. We have often focused on the college setting because we're trying to fine-tune our teaching and make it responsive to the clientele. But that clientele, those students, are the ones who have made it through this other nexus of engagements that constituted their educational development in the earlier years. And a lot of students don't come through that pipeline and land in our classrooms. And there are reasons for that, some of which we can address. And it comes from understanding the nature of the challenge. And so one of the things we're doing here is focusing this year's conference on community-focused social justice advocacy for the Central Valley that focuses on the needs of the K-12 classroom setting, that will take special care to pay attention from the standpoint of the immigrant students, the refugee students, the displaced students, the ones who are feeling marginalized in one way or another. And to shed light on some equity issues and the challenges that impact these environments. Obviously, they also impact the university environments, and we're pretty well attuned from that direction. But what we need to think about is what's involved in emphasizing the importance of cultivating practices that will diversify the teaching mindsets, while cultivating instructional and practical pedagogies that can operate with a culturally respectful perspective that promotes a culture of care. Okay? That's kind of our vision statement here. We want to try to figure out how to help people shape that as a vision, but also engage in practices that will move the needle on the issues that we're beginning to see more clearly all the time. Our underlying goal is to build out culturally responsive teaching that's infused with cultural competence, and we do that by promoting culturally responsive pedagogy and by cultivating equitably minded, diverse, and inclusive educators in our region. And what we are hoping is that the themes that we'll be discussing today and tomorrow will start to become infused in the teacher education programs that are feeding into the credentialing of the future teachers. We're not going to wait for them to land in the classroom and figure out what kind of a problem they're in or what kind of challenges are presented by the wide diversity of the students that will be looking at them when they walk in that door. So it's something that we think needs to start early, and in the case of becoming a teacher, the teacher education portal is a really important one, and we're hopeful that we'll be able to strengthen the presence of that in the curriculum for the eventual impact on our educators in the region. And we hope some of them are going to be taking part today and tomorrow as well, so that it gets accelerated on their end. Our keynote speaker is a rather accomplished person. I was surprised the deeper I looked. He's got kind of two lives. One of them is in academia, and one of them is more in that role he'll be in tonight, which is helping to instill interest in the project, basically, and a commitment to the project of building social equity that permeates the culture. He's currently Vice Provost for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, and he's a faculty member in Higher Education and Student Affairs Administration program at the University of Vermont. He has been in several prior positions, a Chief Diversity Officer at Dickinson College, a Faculty Director for Intercultural Teaching and Faculty Development with the Institute of Teaching Excellence and Faculty Development at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. And he was Dean of the Sophomore Class and the Intercultural Center Director at Swarthmore College. So Dr. Ahmed is an organizational strategist who helps institutions and leaders address diversity and inclusion, equity, race, and intercultural development. And he does it through consulting, he does it through coaching, through group facilitation, and in talks like we'll have this evening. He's a frequently requested speaker nationwide, and I'm really happy that we were able to get him to connect us to a trip he was already engaged in to speak at Colorado College. So it was, it adds to his stress, that I'm sure, to figure out how to change from a Colorado environment to a California environment in a flash, but thank you for doing it. His approach is grounded in a commitment to inclusive community and excellence, and he brings his identity as the son of an Indian Muslim immigrant family and extensive years as an intercultural and diversity consultant as the source of a pivotal understanding of the depth and equity of inclusion work. So Dr. Ahmed is going to be speaking to us both tonight and tomorrow morning. So this evening is a more general kind of framing of the issues organized around the relationship between identity and inequity, and the complexities that one has to navigate in that regard. Tomorrow morning, he'll be doing something a little more practically oriented, looking at the inclusive pedagogy as a classroom strategy. So it'll be more of a practical application of the things he'll be talking about tonight. So will you welcome, please, Dr. Amer? Ahmed.
Thank you, Jim, and thank you all for being here, and both here in person and online. It's really an honor to be here, and as Jim mentioned, I came from Colorado today, and it's been a journey, but I'm really glad to be here. I'm trying to get the slides up here, but just to begin, as Jim said, I'll be speaking in a more general sense today, and then tomorrow we'll have a workshop that's more focused on classroom strategies for pedagogy. So before I do anything, this is not operating the way that I would hope. Sorry about that. All right, I might have to change it up. Are you able to grab my laptop? Because it's not really working properly. Apologize for the technical difficulty. Oh, there it is. It just really wanted to take a long time to come up. So, before I do anything, I want to acknowledge the fact that we are on indigenous land, and acknowledge the Yokuts and the Miwok, as well as the Abenaki people, who are the indigenous people of the land that I reside on in Vermont, and acknowledge the Native people in each of the 4 directions in relationship to us, to always stay mindful that we are on stolen land. Also, of course, all the essential workers. We now have this term and this realization of how completely dependent we are in everything that we do by the labor of so many other people that give us access to clean water, to food, electricity, all the things that allow us to do what we do as educators. And then Jim and everyone else who's been involved with organizing this important conference. Now, we've all been through a lot the last few years, and there's been a rising consciousness in our country and in our world, including the unjust murder of Black people at the hands of law enforcement. And also, I want to also name the ongoing tragedy of the sexual violence that Native women throughout North America are also being subject to. And so we begin today by unequivocally articulating that Black lives matter, that Black trans lives matter, that Native lives matter, and that Black Native lives matter. But as I mentioned, we're in a time of change, and things that seemed like could not change suddenly are changing, and we periodically get little signs of it, like a pro football team's racist moniker changing, right? That we thought just couldn't be possible. But that's a reflection of the changing in consciousness that's happening, in the sense that that consciousness is so prevalent and so significant that even the most dug-in resistance to thoughts and representations of racism are starting to crumble away in some ways. But we're also in a time of deep resistance to that too, right? And so I start today by sharing with you my overall philosophy about education, which is that access without support is not opportunity. So we often talk about access to education, especially in higher ed. We talk a lot about access to higher education. But how do we support students to translate that access to education into meaningful opportunity? And that philosophy is rooted in my own personal story, my own family story. Coming from an Indian Muslim family, a minoritized population within the country of India that has been marginalized in many ways and has limited access to education in particular. And my father, growing up in a rural village, with you hear those stories. I used to walk 20 miles to school. So my dad was actually one of those people, because school was optional for village kids in rural India in his time, because most people are thinking about the hands for the fields, but they're not thinking about the mind and the need to educate that mind. But my dad chose to go to school, and he was able to do well, and he got a rare scholarship that gave him access to higher education that was specifically for his minoritized population, the Indian Muslim population. And so that is basically how my family got to the United States, because he got that education, he did well in that education, he was able to get the kind of support he needed to be able to do well in that education. And that's really at the heart of my family's story. And now we're multiple generations in. My parents came in 1967 to the United States, and so we've been here a while now, and so education is at the core of what our family is about. We've built schools. Sometimes it only takes $50 to build a school in a rural village in the region my dad comes from, and so it's not just an individual commitment myself. It's a family commitment. And then growing up here in the United States, and I grew up in Ohio, and I'll talk more about that in a little bit. As an American Muslim, has been a very complicated experience. And I can really divide my life into two different realities, the life before 9/11 and the life after 9/11. And growing up in the Midwest, before 9/11, I used to get asked by white folks, what's a Muslim? Like, I'd never even heard of it. I don't even know what that is. At the same time, some people thought they knew because we would have vandalism in our mosque, our place of worship. I would constantly be proselytized and told that I was going to go to hell if I didn't accept Jesus as my Lord and Savior. And my experience with most white folks was that I was viewed as foreign or strange, like, oh, you don't eat pork, you don't drink alcohol, that's weird, And my experience with African Americans was very different. Because everybody had a Muslim uncle somewhere in their family, so it was like, oh yeah, we know, we can't have pork when he comes over. So it wasn't as foreign. So there's a real big difference between my encounters with white and black folks, who were predominantly the people in the community that I lived in, and there was also a black mosque in our town, as well as an immigrant mosque, and that was interesting and an issue, like that we had separate mosques, we had connections, but there was also this separation. And I thought it was a negative thing to come from my background. I used to say, why can't we just be more like white people? We're late to everything, we're disorganized, like I wish we could just be more like them. Well, later in life, I came across the work of post-colonialist Frantz Fanon, and he said the oppressed will always believe the worst about themselves. There's an internalization of racism that happens, in which we tell ourselves that we're the bad ones, even though because of the message that we're being told about the fact that we're the bad ones. And that happens in all different kinds of ways, through media, through schools, through places of worship. And so for me, that experience was happening in Springfield, Ohio, a prototypically post-industrial American Midwest town in which many people fell into poverty from the middle class, in which many jobs went away. I went to a high school that was 40% black, 60% white, and I was part of the point whatever other. And I started with 550 students, and I graduated with 270 students from my high school. And of those, so we had a very high dropout rate. And of those 270 students, only 27% of them went to four-year college. So going to college was not part of the culture of the community that I came from. And I want to share a little bit more about the community that I came from. This is a little map of the community and highlighting people that I believe represent black excellence in the community that I come from. So I went to high school with someone you know as John Legend. His name is John Stevens. And Dr. Damon Williams, who wrote the first papers on inclusive excellence, was also from my community. He's John's cousin. And then also Mustafa Islam on the top right. He was the imam at the Black Mosque in my town, who always welcomed me and taught me a lot more about race in the United States. Dr. Yvonne Sion was a faculty member at Antioch College in Yellow Springs, Ohio, wrote the first Black Studies curriculums in higher education, and she is the mother of Dave Chappelle, who's also from there and lives there. But it's also the community in which John Crawford III was gunned down at a Walmart in Beaver Creek, Ohio, a Walmart that I've been to many times. And I often ask myself, who was John going to be? What was his life going to be about? What was the impact he was going to make? And that opportunity never came for John because it got taken away because someone thought he was a threat because he was carrying a toy gun in a store. And so racism, it does not stop the possibility of excellence, right? But it can also stop excellence in its tracks with violence as well. So there are extremes, and there's all sorts of gradients in between around what that experience of racism can be. So for myself, I ended up going to college in Miami University in Ohio, and when I went there, I suddenly learned the geography of Midwest suburbs, these towns that I'd never heard of, and many of the people from those towns, they had 30, 40, 50 kids from their high school come to Miami. They're called feeder schools. I came with 3 other kids from my high school. And when I told people that, yeah, most people from my town didn't go to college, they'd be like, oh, that's amazing. I've never met someone that didn't go to college. Like, that blew my mind, that there were people that literally don't know anybody like all the friends I grew up with. You know, I couldn't believe that was even possible. But that's how segmented our realities are in this country. That you can grow up in a reality in which everybody goes to college, and you can grow up in a reality in which almost nobody goes to college. And that proximity can be minutes away from each other, right? And that, to me, is part of what defines the stratification here in the United States. And so for myself, I didn't particularly like this place where everybody wore J. Crew and Abercrombie and listened to Dave Matthews. And so for me, I was like not really feeling it. And so I decided to study abroad, and I went to South Africa. And I was in South Africa in 1998 when Nelson Mandela was president, during a process known as the Truth and Reconciliation process, which was a process in which they publicly brought out all the atrocities that happened under legal segregation, known as apartheid, that had only ended 4 years prior. And I was on a campus that had recently been racially integrated. And I was in Durban, South Africa, and in Durban you have, and in South Africa in general, you have blacks, you have whites, you have coloreds, who are the mixed race folks but lived in segregation, and Indians. So all of a sudden I had a racial place in the situation. And I was on a campus that had recently been integrated, but yet to a person, each race stuck to themselves. You never saw people from these different races with each other. And I was with 3 other Americans. 2 were black and 1 was white. And we would walk around together, and we looked like the diversity advertisement for the New South Africa. Like, you never saw people who looked like us walking around together. But what it taught me, being there, being in class and hearing people say, this thing that came out in the newspaper today about what occurred under apartheid, that was my uncle this happened to. Right? These things were fresh in people's realities. And in that time, I remember thinking, we're not having this conversation in the United States. You know, we're not dealing with the realities of the way racism is functioning and operating in our society. And now we're further along in the conversation where we are having it, but how are we having that conversation? Who is having that conversation? How is it functioning and operating in our schools and in our educational environment and in our society? Is it going well? And why? Why is it, I think it's fair to say, it's not really going well, right? We're in deeply polarized times, right? And so, as I continued to think about this, as I was studying Black Studies and cultural anthropology, I continued to do so at Indiana University for my master's, and that's when 9/11 happened. And so all of a sudden, my community became the most visible target. So I said there was 2 different realities for me. There's the life before 9/11 and then the life after, where suddenly my community became a focus and subject to hate crimes, threats, harassment, surveillance, investigation. I've been subject to all of those things, or myself or my family members. Every male in my family has been on a flight watch list at some point in their lives. My brother's kids, from the time they were 6 years old, were on flight watch lists. And, you know, we were expected to apologize for something that happened to us as Americans. My brother lived in Manhattan. We were fearful of their family's life when 9/11 happened, but yet somehow we were responsible for this thing that happened to us. So we went from this group that was relatively unknown to this group with all this suspicion around us. And then the Patriot Act was passed, which undermines the rights of all American citizens, still on the books today. You do not have the right to a lawyer, to be charged with whatever you're being held. You can be held indefinitely without being charged. We do not have habeas corpus in the United States anymore, which is a fundamental basis of American and Western law. And that's overwhelmingly used against my community. And so ever since 9/11, there's been, you know, this can sometimes mean someone just disappears because they're being held indefinitely. We don't even know what happens to the person. And so with this experience, and as a person who was already studying and learning and trying to understand and grapple with race and racism in the United States, I wanted to be part of creating change. And as I was becoming a performer of spoken word, and I got engaged in a global hip-hop activist movement, a multiracial coalition of solidarity and social justice that was representative of our generation, of young people all over the world who were trying to use hip-hop as a voice. And that led me to working on diversity, equity, inclusion work in higher education. I started to use that as my platform. I would organize spaces like this, and I would also do these hip-hop summits, and I would do different kinds of work. The first 2 colleges I worked at, I worked with American students of color as well as international students. And what I learned along the way, as I was engaging in anti-racism and diversity and social justice work, I met some of the most prominent people in that field early on in my career. But as I started to do anti-racism workshops and so forth, I started to find a challenge. I found resistance, specifically from white people. Because I came into it believing that if they only just knew and understood like what it is and how it and what the reality is for so many of us, that they'd be willing to change. And what I found was quite the opposite. It was people digging themselves in, disengaging, shutting down, denying, disregarding, dismissing. And I would go to folks in the field and they would say, "You just got to keep pushing." But I was like, this feels like I'm deepening the polarization on my campus, you know? And so I was searching. And I got exposed to the intercultural field, which was used more by international educators. And the big critique by DEI people of that field was that they like to talk about culture and identity, but they don't like to talk about equity and power and systems of inequity. And I was like, that's true. I'm seeing that, and that's a problem. But I kept asking, well, why can't we just bring these 2 pieces together? Because if you think about it, you kind of need both, right? And so I continued to do my work at Concordia College in Moorhead, Minnesota, continued to work with both American students of color and international students, and create spaces where those communities came together in unique ways. Again, bridging this intercultural framework with DEI, and I'll talk a little bit more about what the actual concepts that underneath what I'm talking about in a little bit. But I do want to share that along the way, when I was out there, when I was doing these hip-hop summits, we would always bring out youth from the community, much like you're seeking to do, engaging the youth of this community. Well, out there, that involved Native kids and Somali kids. And I ended up getting invited out, a group of us got invited out to do work with Native youth at Standing Rock. So these photos are from 2006, 2007. And they did a youth wellness conference every year. And in this example, we brought some breakdancers from New York City, and we had a performance where we had the traditional fancy dancers battling the breakdancers. Because hip-hop was huge with Native youth, and part of our hip-hop activist movement was about using hip-hop as an educational tool. And part of what they were doing was showing that hip-hop at its core is an indigenous cultural expression that's rooted in African spiritual and cultural traditions. And what they were doing was making the connection between the indigeneity at the core of hip-hop and the indigeneity of their own ways of life, and helping their young people to see the connection, right? That being interested in hip-hop does not need to be a rejection of their way of life, but actually an embracing of their way of life. And so when we did this performance, these young people got it. And these are young people that had tremendous challenges, right? But those very same young people, they became the water protectors, the ones that now have become famous all around the world, that stood up against the Dakota Access Pipeline. And I want to tell you a very interesting story. And so this is actually a graffiti mural at Standing Rock. This is from 2008. But an elder at Standing Rock said something to me back in 2007, LaDonna Brable Allard, and she said to me, these young people you're working with, she's like, they're the prophesized 7th generation. And they are the first generation that's growing up with their language, with their ceremonies, with their way of life. And the prophecy is that they will resist a colonizer and make Standing Rock known throughout the world. You can imagine what I thought, a kid from Ohio that grew up with no tribal nations around. Nobody I knew had ever even heard of Standing Rock. And everything she said 10 years later came true. I could say Standing Rock from this stage right now, and everybody here has actually heard of that place because of those young people. But it starts from them honoring their way of life, their culture, embracing it, not viewing it as a negative thing, not viewing the thing that makes them beautiful and powerful as something bad, but embracing it, right? And seeing is that it's actually something very powerful that allows us to enact meaningful change in the world. And Frantz Fanon said, for a colonized people, the most essential value, because it's the most concrete, is first and foremost the land which will bring them bread and above all dignity, right? And I think that's an important thing for us to be thinking about here in the Central Valley. If we think about the young people growing up here, what is their relationship to this land and understanding their connection to it? So I went to University of Michigan after that. And if you don't know about University of Michigan, they are considered to be the case study of diversity, equity, inclusion work in higher education because they went to the Supreme Court to defend affirmative action in 2003, which is a particularly salient thing in this moment given the current Supreme Court case that was deliberated this past week. And I share this because this case in 2003 is the reason why diversity became this big phrase and concept and idea and became so prevalent. Because they knew if their argument was that we need to rectify the historical inequity that exists in our systems, that they would lose. So they said, okay, well, we're going to make the argument for the educational benefit of diversity, that everybody benefits in an educational environment, that it enhances learning and helps the democratic enterprise. And they won. But there was a problem in that concept because it connotes the idea that if you have diversity, that the educational benefit is automatic. But the reality is that does not happen without equity and inclusion. Because without equity and inclusion, you don't have voice of the people from the margins. Because the inequity is part of what silences the voices in the margins. So you can have as much diversity as you want, right, in a space, in a learning environment. But if you don't have equity and inclusion, you don't harness the educational benefit that comes from that. And so as a result, in higher education, we then had this concept of inclusive excellence. And I mentioned to you, Dr. Damon Williams from my hometown in Ohio wrote the first white paper on that concept. So this idea that it's through inclusion that we get to a different level of academic excellence because we harness the ideas and the perspectives and the experiences from everybody. But you have to have equity, right, in order to be able to bring the voices from the margins into the conversation and alleviate the inequity in whose voice is heard, valued, and respected in that conversation, right? So we have to create a climate of mutual respect, right? In order to combat that inequity, right? That every perspective, every trajectory, every experience has value in a learning environment, right? And that is what makes our learning environments more rich. In order to do that, you have to understand that our identities are complex, right? And that we're negotiating a lot of different parts of our identity at the same time. A lot of social identities, our race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, class, right? But all of that is subject to a context, right? Is subject to an environment that we're operating in. And so we're making these negotiations on our understanding of who we are in relationship to one another based on the environment that we're in. And as related to those social identities, we're born having no idea about them. Right? We're not born with social identities, right? We're taught them. They're social constructs. And so we go through this process of passive and active acceptance. My family tells me I'm black or I'm brown or I'm, Indian or Jewish. So I say, okay, great. Okay, I am the thing that I'm being told that I am. And then we go through this contestation period of like, wait a minute, because we start to experience stereotypes and being reduced down because of holding these identities. And the world is telling me that because I'm black, I'm this, that, and the other, or because I'm Jewish, I'm this, that, and the other. And so we go through this passive and then active resistance of contesting. Wait a minute, that doesn't define me. That's trying to reduce me down, and I'm something more than that, right? And then we go through this redefining. What does it mean for me to hold that identity and still be me, right? Because we have this relationship between our social identities and our personal identity at the core, right? So that redefining is that that negotiation of understanding who I am as a person in relationship to these social identities that I'm holding, right? But we only get to do that if we're in a learning environment that fosters that actually tells me it's okay for me to contest and redefine and reimagine and re-understand what these identities mean for me, right? But not let those identities simply define me, right? Without an opportunity to shape it for myself, and then internalize and synthesize that. I mentioned to you about intercultural skills, right? Now, this is going to be also important for the classroom conversation too, is that a lot of times in the conversations we're having about equity and social justice these days, we think that you just have to learn every aspect of every kind of inequity, and then that's how we're going to be able to make this all better. And the reality is that you can't know everything about everybody. It's impossible. So what we really need to do is to position ourselves to be more likely to learn, grow, and understand, right? And so then we have to think about the skills and competencies that position us to be more likely to learn, grow, and understand. And what characterizes that learning and development process. And so in the intercultural framework, what it's saying is that, I'm not going to go into the details, but what it's saying is that it's a developmental process, right? I feel like DEI work is the one part of education we don't treat like education. It's framed as you either get it or don't get it, or now it's woke or not woke, right? So it's like, if I don't get it, or if I'm not woke, how do I go about the process of getting woke, right? Learning is developmental and scaffolded. Now, it's understandable for us to want people to get it, because when you're marginalized and you say, hey, I experienced this, I'm a woman and I experience patriarchy and sexism, and I just want you to understand it, right? However, unfortunately, most people don't learn that way, right? And so usually it's a process of learning and development. And there are things that characterize that journey, and that it's a lifelong journey that we're all on, right? And so I'm not going to go into the details here, but the idea is that as you go further on that journey, you increase your capacity to effectively navigate the complexity of similarities and differences, right? And you do that, you unlock your ability to be able to do that with these core competencies. Self-awareness, I would argue, is the foundation. That you really, if you do not have an understanding of who you are and your identities, your experiences, your biases, your communication styles, it becomes very difficult for you to be able to empathize. And when I say empathy, validating someone else's experience is true for them, right? It does not require agreement. So why is self-awareness important? I would argue that really when you're of a dominant group, it's very difficult to be self-aware about what characterizes that. As a cisgendered heterosexual man, I don't have to think about that very much. And so as a result, I have to be very intentional about developing a self-awareness around what that is for me. Because the tendency is that when we're marginalized around an identity, we tend to notice that part of it more, right? And so self-awareness is about developing that foundation. I would argue it's particularly challenging for white Americans, because in the United States, when Europeans immigrated to the United States, they did not think of themselves as white. It was they thought of themselves as Irish or German or Italian, and we had this process of constructing whiteness, which was really an assimilation into the American capitalistic system. And so as a result, I would argue that in North America, it's the only place you'll go in the world where you'll meet people that say, I don't have a culture. And I'm like, but you do have a culture. It's very different from mine. I see it every day, you know? And so that statement is a reflection of a lack of self-awareness, because the dominant culture has been so normed to the point, and the loss of cultural identity has happened in a way in which I don't even know what it is the thing that I do is. And if you don't know what that is, you don't have the reference point you need to compare and contrast what's similar and different between yourself and others, right? So that reference point is absolutely foundational. Tolerance for ambiguity, being okay with the fact you don't know all the details all the time, and that's okay, right? So I get the question, what are you? I'm like, well, I'm a person. No, well, where are you from? Well, I'm from Ohio. No, where are you really from, right? And so that's a lack of tolerance for ambiguity. But people oftentimes say to me, but Amer, I just want to know. I'm just, I'm curious. What's so wrong about that? And if you notice, curiosity is up there. If you're not curious, you don't even want to know. So it's good to be curious, but I also have patience up there. Can we be patient for long enough to let people self-disclose the things that they want to share as they're ready? Sometimes we have trauma around the things that other people just want to know because they see you, right? And again, if you notice, these are skills that everybody can work on. There's no one group. And so part of what's valuable about talking about intercultural skills is that it's not saying you have this to work on and you don't. And that was something that I found in the anti-racism work that I was doing, was that it really put white people in the defensive. Now, that doesn't mean that there's not a value and importance to that. It just means that, in my view, this is a more effective intervention strategy to get people into a place where they're more willing to do the specific anti-racism, sexism, heterosexism workshop, and so forth and so on, right? To get people into a place where they actually want to learn that stuff, right? So in my view, you start with working on your intercultural competence, your ability to navigate the complexity of human similarities and differences across various social content and cultural contexts, accounting for the privilege and marginality that's part of that negotiation, accounting for the fact that there's inequities in the encounter, right? That if I'm a man interacting with a woman, that's part of the dynamic, and that there's an inequity that shapes and influences and impacts that dynamic. So I don't know how many of you have seen this model, the iceberg conception of the nature of culture. And I'm using a broad definition of culture. There's a culture around class, there's a culture around sexual orientation, there's a culture around gender, not just ethnic culture, okay? But if you think about culture like an iceberg, 9/10 of it is primarily beneath the surface. And oftentimes we tend to focus on the stuff above the surface, the visible stuff, the obvious stuff. And that's fine, right? But the reality is that 9/10 of what's going on is beneath the surface. The eye behavior, the body language, the ordering of time, the nature of friendship, conception of past and future, right? All of this varies across different identity groups, right? Now, if you bring two icebergs together, where is it going to hit, at the top or the bottom? At the bottom, right? Most conflict is around this stuff, right? So my spouse, when we went to India, she's from Harlem. Her family's Dominican. She grew up in Harlem, in the Harlem River projects. And before we went to India, I was like, I should probably tell her that people generally tend to stare in the public sphere, like at other people. And so I told her, I was like, just so you know, like people tend to stare, they're not just staring at you. She's like, I don't know why you're telling me this, but okay. So she got there and she was like, I'm so glad you told me about the staring thing. And I'm like, well, why? And she's like, because where I come from, if you're staring at someone like that, my response is gonna be like, you got a problem? Like, what's the issue? Like, why are you staring at me, right? And so, so these things, they vary across cultures, contexts, environment, situations, right? And a lot of conflict happens around this stuff, right? So it's important for part of the self-awareness stuff is to be aware of what that stuff is for you. So perfect example for the education context. How many of you have either said or know someone that has said, I judge someone's character based on whether they look me in the eye or not? Now, if you come from a culture where the most disrespectful thing you could do is look someone in the eye, especially a person of authority, okay, let's say a teacher, that's not going to work out well for that student, is it? If my teacher has now judged my character because I'm not looking at them in the eye, right? So these dynamics have huge implications for educational environments. And along that process of developing self-awareness and thinking about the inequities, we have to be learning what are the agent identities, where's our areas of privilege, and where are our target identities, where are the parts of my identity that are marginalized. So I shared some of my agent identities. I'm a cisgendered, male, heterosexual, able-bodied. I have significant class status and education and so forth and so on. But I also have target identities around race and religion, right? And so the reality is that we're all agents and targets at the same time. But our tendency is to notice the ways in which we're targets. So if you think about it like a headwind and a tailwind, right? When you have a tailwind, you get to where you want to go, sometimes even faster than you expect. You're like, hey, this is great. You might not even notice that you have it. But when you have a headwind, you notice it. And you notice that it's making it harder to get to where you want to go. And so our tendency is to notice the headwind and not the tailwind. When the reality is that our work is on our tailwind, right? Not because it's not understandable to notice the ways in which you're being marginalized. It's frustrating. Of course it is, right? However, right, that's not the area that I have access to social power, right? In which I can actually open up that power for someone else. Because the reality is that part of what we have to do is that we have to leverage our access to social power in order to be able to interrupt the way these inequities are functioning and operating, these systems of advantages and disadvantages, right? And the multiple levels in which it's operating. And so if you think about it like a wheel, if you took one of these wheels, let's just say we ended racism tomorrow. Hooray, racism is over. Would that wheel continue to turn? Yeah. Because you haven't fundamentally altered the way systems of oppression function and operate. What it requires to dismantle this wheel is for everybody to be working on their tailwind, on their privileges, their agent identities, their access to social power. That's how you dismantle this wheel, because that's where you have the ability to leverage your access to open it up for those who don't get that unearned benefit, right? And if we're all doing it, that's how we transform the system, right? And so, like, sexism is like, if it was up to women, sexism would already be over, right? They're half the people on the planet, right? So like, it would already, so it's not necessarily a numbers game. That South Africa taught me that. Whites were in the minority, right? It's about leveraging that access to social power and opening it up, and everybody doing that, right? And so to be able to do that, we have to actively organize, actively create alternatives. We need to have an intersectional analysis in which we understand the specific experiences at certain intersections, like Black queer women have a specific experience that is different from white queer women, right? And we have to challenge the ways in which people of dominant groups have internalized their dominance, right? So the example that I often give is the Access Hollywood bus with Billy Bush just going along with what Trump says and the very sexist things that he's saying, as opposed to saying, hey, wait a minute, like, that is really, really sexist stuff you're saying. I'm not okay with that, right? That's what it means to challenge the internalized dominance, right? But also challenging internalized subordination. So the metaphor for internalized subordination is the crabs in the barrel. You know about the crabs in the barrel metaphor?
No.
So if you put crabs in a barrel, when one tries to climb out, the others pull it down to prevent it from getting out, right? Whereas if it was just left alone, it'd be able to climb out, right? And so if you think about the barrel as a system of oppression, right, it doesn't have to do anything. It just has to exist as the structure that it is. The crabs are the ones doing all the work, right? And so that's kind of how internalized subordination, internalized racism, internalized marginality, right? And so in order to dismantle that wheel, we need to have alliances between the agent identities and the target identities, the people who have privilege and the people who are marginalized. And when we build those alliances, we have to stand with and not for people, right? We have to listen to people, the voices from the margin, understand people's stories and experiences, and stand with the group that is marginalized, and not for them, and speak on behalf of the group that is marginalized, assuming that you know what the other group wants, right? And when I use the word alliance, I'm saying that specifically because a lot of people have really challenged the term ally. And I think really the reason why people don't like the word ally is because of the way it sometimes gets used, right? But the reason why I feel like it's important for us to understand the importance of the term ally, because it connotes alliance, right? Solidarity, that we stand together and we build power that creates change through that. I'm sure, how many of you know what a microaggression is? Okay, everybody knows that, right? However, one thing that I want us to think about, because we should all probably know what implicit biases are, right? The biases that we're socialized into and that we perpetuate implicitly. But here's the thing: we are more likely to operate from our implicit biases, and we're more likely to microaggress when we are rushed, taxed, or tired. Let me say that again. We are more likely to operate from our implicit biases and microaggress when we are rushed, taxed, or tired. So, you not sleeping well enough, you not taking care of yourself, you not invested in your own personal health and wellness, right? At just well-being, right? If you don't do that, you're more likely to marginalize your students, right? And it's really, sometimes it's hard for us to make that connection, but on a psychological level, what it is that when we're tired and we're stressed and we're exhausted, we operate from our automated responses, right? And so then, and implicit bias is an automated response, right? And so what we're looking for is to get to an optimal level of medium stress. Not all stress is bad, right? And we want to be able to perform well in what we do as educators, but we don't want to operate from either extreme of low or high stress, right? And we do so because these systems of marginalization and oppression have left numerous people with unresolved trauma, including our students. And it shows up in numerous ways. So we have to invest and commit to healing as a necessary part of this process, both for ourselves and for others, right? The reality is that there is so much trauma in the society between genocide and slavery, sexism, homophobia, all of these different kinds of inequities have left us deeply traumatized. And I highly recommend at some point in your journey to read Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome by Dr. Joy DeGruy, which talks about generational trauma. the ways in which the trauma gets embedded into our families, into our cultures, passed down, embedded into culture, into cultural things that we think are cultural practices, but are just simply a continuation of passing down trauma through the generations. An estimated 70% of adults in the United States have experienced a traumatic event, and I would say that number is from before COVID. I think that number is much higher now, right? But I share this to bring you this important thing, which is that these systems of oppression, we're working on it, but it's not going to end tomorrow, right? This is a journey. This is a lifelong commitment for me, and what I'm working on in my life, right? And in the meantime, in that taking care of myself, that wellness, that trying to operate from a positive state of well-being, I'm really trying to talk to folks about the difference between reacting and responding. Because when we react to someone else's marginalizing behavior, understandably, it is always understandable to react. It is not always productive to react. It's usually not productive to react. And the reason why is that when you are reacting to someone else's behavior, you're giving away your power. You're letting someone else dictate who you're being in that moment. And you are not engaged in responding, which involves some kind of critical reflection in aligning with who am I trying to be in this world. You're not aligning with your highest and best self, which is hard to do when someone is marginalizing you. So none of what I'm saying is about it being easy, right? But how do we navigate those challenging moments? Actively discern it. It's not to let people off the hook. It's not to say that it's okay. But we have to navigate it. We have to deal with it, because you know who we normally take it out on? Each other. The people closest to us. Our family, our friends. So my question for people who are consistently operating from a state of reaction around the ways we experience oppression is, how's that working out for you? What's going on in your life with that? Are you seeing the results that, in your life that you would want to see? It's not that it's not understandable, but how's that manifesting? What's that translating into? Because we got to cope and deal with this stuff, because it's not going away tomorrow. We're going to work on it. We're going to keep working on it. But it's not going away, right? So how do we engage in liberation and not just Band-Aids in what we're doing in this work, right? We have to deal with the underlying deeper issue. We got to deal with the trauma. We got to deal with the isms, the systems. We can't just think that it's going to go away, right? It just grows more challenging over time, right? And we're seeing that, right? Because we're not having the real dialogue right now. We got people yelling at each other, right? Operating from their automated responses, operating from their trauma, right? And it's taken us down this downward spiral, right? So we got to work through it. We got to hang in there with the people we don't agree with, right? One of the most, as a person who grew up in the Midwest and has had a lot of complex experiences in the Midwest, moving to the Northeast in New England and living in a predominantly Puerto Rican community and working in Amherst, Massachusetts, and being told by people with Black Lives Matter signs that I shouldn't live in Holyoke, Massachusetts, because it's unsafe and that they don't go there, and then they find out I'm from Ohio, and they're like, man, it must be so racist there. And I'm like, but you just said something really racist to me. It's like, when they found out I was in Holyoke, they were like, oh, what are you going to do about the schools? Do you feel safe? And all them knowing my Afro-Latina spouse, who's Dominican, but yet, and so the idea is that the racism is out there. It's not here. It's over there. Because I've got the Black Lives Matter sign. I've done all the right things. I'm doing all the things that the people are telling me I'm supposed to do, right? But what's not happening is the internalizing, right? The relationship building, the alliance building, the difficult conversation, right? It's like we're trying to find these other ways. And so part of what and I don't want to go too much into detail because of time, but part of what we need to learn is how do we restore the harm, right? And increasingly transform the harm, right? Transformative justice. But at the very least, how do we get out of this punitive way of thinking about harm with one another, right? It's like because that's all part of the downward spiral, and it is not a coincidence that we live in the country with the greatest incarceration rate in the world, right? That we have this punishment mentality, right? That's rooted and connected in racism and sexism and homophobia, right? It's all connected, right? So we have to find a way to break the cycle. We have to hang in there for the difficult dialogue. We have to find ways to restore the harm when we're causing harm to one another, right? And when we do so, as we increasingly talk about restorative justice and all the different kinds of ways we seek to pursue that, we also have to acknowledge that Native people have been doing that forever, right? That we are, because otherwise we're just Columbusing it. Because it's just one more example in which we act like that we just came up with something that indigenous people have been doing forever, right? And so, again, I don't have time to go into the details, but it's just to plant that seed of like how we need to think about getting to a deeper place in this work, right? So I leave you with the educator equity imperative. We need you now more than ever. It has never been more clear how badly we need equity educators that are deeply committed to embodying this practice. Not just learning intellectually the practice, but embodying it, right? And never forgetting that the anger of others is often rooted in unhealed trauma, right? And it's very hard to do, right? So we have to do that inner self-work to prepare ourselves for when we receive the unhealed trauma of others, right? Because that's just the reality of part of what it means to be an equity educator. And we have to support each other as colleagues in this work who sometimes have to be the recipients of this stuff. And so we have to find ways to support each other, to engage in some alchemy, some transformation of that energy, and to heal ourselves, right? And to acknowledge we have all just been through a lot. And we can acknowledge that. We have lost, we've struggled, all of us, and it has been deeply inequitable. But we've all been through it. And so now it's time for us to rise from the ashes like the phoenix and to accept the equity educator imperative. Thank you very much. So are we doing a Q&A?
Thank you so much for that wonderful presentation and reminder of the work that we have to do. On one of the slides you had mentioned kind of like the ways in which we have some intercultural work to do internally and the stages recognition of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'll take it back. Yeah. Here?
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
that one. And there's also another slide, I think, where you mentioned, all of the factors that yes, that one, the elements of how it's helpful to become aware of that. What I didn't notice on there is like we talk about empathy, tolerance, curiosity, patience, but the humility part.
Yeah.
And so I was just curious to know, like, you know, is that also maybe just embedded through all of the other elements? Because I think being culturally humble and you working through that approach also helps a lot of the practitioners that are out, including teachers and professors and things in the classroom.
Yeah, I do think it's embedded in that. I will speak to it more explicitly around inclusive pedagogy tomorrow, so thank you for that. But yeah, I think tolerance for ambiguity and patience and curiosity, I think, are all connected to humility, right? It's the engaging in the not knowing, and so that's part of the inclusive pedagogy practice, because a lot of times we are taught as educators to be knowers as opposed to learners, and learning involves a level of humility, right? Because you don't learn that which you know, you learn that which you do not know. So by definition, learning involves humility, right? But we are in a system that's rooted in patriarchal Eurocentric norms of education that is about knowing or the performance of knowing, right? And so, yeah, humility is absolutely embedded into all of it. It has to be part of an inclusive teaching and learning practice, for sure. So thank you for bringing that up.
I just want to kind of add to that. You know, I wasn't prepared to enter the academy like I thought I was in terms of teaching. Even going to, you know, a master's program that was a teaching track. No one prepared me for the amount of ego in the academy. And we don't even say it, right? Like I felt like I was a sheep around wolves. And being, at that time a little younger, proud Chicana in a white supremacy institution with ego and faculty, you know, 75% white. And everyone's a teacher, no one's a student. And folks, colleagues behaving in ways in which we would never accept in our classrooms. But it was okay among colleagues and fellow faculty. And when I see this, I'm like, yes. I mean, it's like emotional reparations, so thank you. I appreciate it. But when I look around at my colleagues, honestly, I don't know how to make someone care enough to do the internal work. This, yes, but I mean, there's years of looking around to see maybe this person, definitely this person, oh hell no, these people ain't doing shit. You know, and so I don't know how to, I've in many ways I feel trapped in an institution who performs this, uses student-centered language while their behaviors support institutional support actions.
Yeah.
And so I find myself oftentimes just shaking my head and saying, how do you make people do the internal work and care for minoritized communities?
Well, thank you for that. So, two things. One will be about my day job as a chief diversity officer of a research institution, and I'll get to that in a moment. The other piece is that for me to sustain myself in this work, to be able to continue on and to not burn out, because a lot of us have and are, a lot of us have left the field, are leaving the field. I mean, this is the other subtext of the crisis moment that we're in, that we have a lot of people that don't want to show up as educators, right, at all, right? But I taught myself, the subtext of the transition from the anti-racism intervention strategy to the intercultural intervention strategy was attitudinal work. And I'm going to be honest, this is rooted in a spiritual belief for me. It's tied to my own spiritual tradition, which is that as human beings, we have free will. We can't make someone believe something that they don't want to believe, right? If someone's going to be homophobic, there is nothing I can do to make that person not be homophobic. So in an institutional setting, what I have clearly for myself defined is that when someone goes home, I cannot control what their attitudes and beliefs are. But in an institutional setting, we can set an expectation of skills and behaviors that everybody's going to work on, embedded into every job description. This gets into the CDO mindset, into every job description, into every hire, every post, and that does not alleviate your immediate reality and concern on the daily basis as a faculty member who's being marginalized within your departments, and I understand that, right? But I think in the absence of systemic strategies across our institutions, you know, at UVM, the University of Vermont, we are about to have a faculty union contract with a requirement for all faculty, right? That is a major accomplishment for our university that puts us on a path. It doesn't get us there. It puts us on a path that will take a long time, right? But to set that expectation that this is part of everybody's work, in every role, in every position, including every faculty position. And yes, there's some people that are just going to need to retire. But look, and I'm aware of the early retirement program at CSU. So I will say, in my experience, and this is just across a number of institutions I've engaged, junior faculty generally tend to be less resistant. They also tend to be disempowered and they don't use their voice until they get tenure. But the idea that this is part of their job is not an anathema to most junior faculty, right? It's mostly yes, that should be part of my job. And the reality is that we have a culture of academic hazing, right? And this mindset that, well, I had to go through it, so you have to go through it. So when we're trying to build out these DEI faculty recruitment retention strategies, and we're talking about supporting faculty, they're like, why do we have to do anything? Or having mentorship programs or this and that. They're like, what? We didn't have that when I had to figure it out and I was trial by fire and this and that or whatever. So we have to break that academic hazing culture too. And we have to say, yes, you experienced that, and that was not necessarily a good thing or healthy, right? And the reality is that we have a diversifying professoriate now, and we can't just continue to reinforce those Eurocentric patriarchal norms and just think that that's okay. And even if they don't want to accept it as Eurocentric patriarchal norms, it's still just not healthy, right? What does that have to do with academic excellence? I know that there's a belief, right, that was part of the trial by fire, was part of how we get to academic excellence, but there's no evidence of such, right? There's plenty of people producing phenomenal work without being academically hazed, right? And so we need to lift up those stories and every chance we possibly can. Sorry if that's not, I kind of...
If you have a question, put your hand up. Anybody? Amer, I'm wondering, one of the things that you're really focusing on is the importance of recognizing the complexity which stretches the timeline for addressing things.
Mm-hmm.
You're also talking about characteristics that come naturally to some people, not so naturally to others.
Mhm.
Some of those who it doesn't come naturally to are very resistant, and others are it's just not how they've been raised, and so they haven't gotten there yet. When you're dealing with a classroom of young kids who are the potential of those differences, working in a structure that was built years ago, probably in a lot of its characteristics, because things conserve and take a long time to change, much longer to change than our society has taken to change in the last 2 decades.
Mhm.
I kind of wonder how you envision the teacher who kind of is in the middle of all of
Yeah.
that stuff and isn't clearly aligned. They're not disassociating from the problem, but they know they get their standards to teach to. They got things that they're
Yeah.
expected to do, and they don't. And they'll sometimes feel like there's no time
Yeah.
to add this new thing. But I get the feeling that it's not really such a new thing as it is something to kind of embed in the way that you're doing all the other work.
Yeah.
So can you talk a little bit about it?
Yeah, and I think some of the folks that you're talking about, they haven't. There's a lot of things they haven't tried yet. You know what I mean? There's a lot of things that they haven't tried in what happens when students' identities are centered, right? And when who they are is a resource for learning in the classroom, and that they become more engaged and invested, and then you get better performance from the students. You get greater excellence from the students, as opposed. So I think folks need to see that difference. So the reason why inclusive excellence was such an important framework in higher education was because the belief in higher education was that diversity, equity, and inclusion was at odds with academic excellence, right? That if we diversify, and if we have more kinds of, and we have these, and the subtext is those people, whoever those people are, but I think we know who it was historically defined as those people, that, they're just going to lower the standards, right? They're going to lower the academic, and even the narratives that we have around schools, and which schools are good schools and which ones are bad schools, and this and that, right? As opposed to, how do we harness the beauty and the greatness and the brilliance and the creativity and the innovation of these various cultures, groups, backgrounds, identities, experiences? How do we lift that up? How do we center that? How do we value that? How do we harness that to unlock a greater excellence? I think a lot of teachers have never seen that. They've never seen that actually happen, right? Because they're operating in a particular kind of way that, and a narrative that tells them that does not produce academic excellence. So therefore, if I do that, I'm not going to meet my standards. I'm not going to be able to have them meet the standards that I'm expected for them to meet. And so they need to be shown evidence that it works. And that comes through professional development, it comes through communities of practice, it comes through the kinds of ways to help teachers see the difference that it makes. Not just for the students in terms of how they feel, which is important, but also in terms of the results that it yields.
Last call for questions. Thank you very much, Amer.
Thank you.
Ready to go?
Can you folks hear me? Yes? Nope? Nope? Not yet? Okay. All right. All right. Our next speaker, I have the great honor of introducing. My name is Dr. John McFarland. I'm an assistant professor in teacher education here at Stan State. So I work with upcoming middle school and high school teachers coming into the profession. I've been here for about 5 years now, and this topic, so I want to thank Jim Tuedo for this, because this is really dear to my heart. And our next speaker, I'm very, very pleased to introduce. So Dr. Amelia Herrera-Nakamura, for the last 15 years, she has been teaching high school level English to immigrants, refugees, asylum seekers. And she loves her job and believes that all students deserve a quality education provided by the most thoughtful, intellectual, philosophical, and caring teachers. Her current scholarship, work, and practice centers on the intersections of neuroscience, Eastern philosophy, racialized trauma, with a particular emphasis on anti-racist practices in the public education system. She co-wrote a book, Community Equity Audits, the communities and schools working together to eliminate the opportunity gap, a book inspired by her doctoral dissertation research that she conducted with former CSU faculty and 2 other students. Dr. Herrera-Nakamura uses her expertise to write social emotional learning policy for the California Department of Education and advises it with the Teach Plus National Education Policy Advisory Committee. She is also the state treasurer for the United Black Student Unions of California, as well as an adjunct teacher educator in the teacher preparation program at CSU Stanislaus, where she hopes to inspire a new generation of teachers to be abolitionist pedagogues. Dr. Herrera-Nakamura.
Oh, sorry. Hi guys, you can see all my chaos with all my tabs. I feel like if I close my tabs, I'm gonna forget what's there. So I leave it open, and then I cry when I accidentally press X or whatever. So, awesome that gentleman, and the gentleman that spoke before me kind of brings up, just Western, Eurocentric pedagogy and just norms and things. And actually, I was talking about that on my way here with my husband, because I'm like, you just never feel done with a presentation, or you never feel like things are complete. And the part of that is Western, colonized, structure and systems, and right? So he's like, just preface this with, not that I'm not done, but you know what, we're just gonna take it as a dialogue. And being that this is a nice, intimate group, I think that if we decenter it out of the agenda, and I got to get through it this way, I think it'll be a good start. So I'm gonna just go for it, and then and we'll see where it goes. But originally, as you guys see, kind of the title here. Sorry, it's loading. Emotional justice is social justice. Although I completely believe this, I'm not sure how in line my presentation is with it. There's definitely pieces all over about emotions. You'll read between the lines in terms of the justice pieces, but definitely it's about the self, and really trying to understand the considerations and adjustments that we as educators need to make in order to truly work in a genuine way with those who have been marginalized, our students who have been most historically marginalized. And specifically in my experience, those are the immigrants, refugees, and asylum seekers Dr. McFarland just spoke of. And actually, it's my 16th year. I wrote that bio last year. I'm like, I really gotta update stuff. And then anyway, sorry, I'm gonna lick my lips a lot. I've been teaching since this morning. I've actually not been home. But I want to start basically with the questions with yourself, or opening this up to you guys, and with a shoulder partner or whomever. Really think about if there's ever been parts of your identity that people have looked over, possibly have there ever been parts of your identity that people have overly looked at, and definitely, how did this make you feel? Did you feel visible? Did you feel invisible? Too visible? Did you feel out on Front Street? For those of you, I don't know if you guys know, Front Street's just like, wow, like putting your stuff out there, right? So again, sit with that maybe for a few seconds, but definitely talk to your folks around you, because I'd love, again, to hear if you've ever felt like this, or if this has ever happened, any one of these scenarios. So chat amongst yourselves. Give you a minute or so. Actually, I'm gonna run and get my water while you guys are chatting. Well, I still hear a little bit, so I'll wait a few more seconds. Hopefully, you guys are just ready and roaring to answer a question or two. But again, out of full disclosure and vulnerability, I definitely will be as vulnerable tonight as I can when things come up. But just to start off, I will share mine. Although, so people understand, like, people are not necessarily outright sometimes with their racism, right? So I don't know all the ways that people have dogged me out in different things, or have overlooked or looked at my particular pieces of me more than they should, or whatever. I don't know all of the things, but I know that one of the things that people have overly looked at are my long nails. Most of the time I'm wearing bright lipstick, but it's faded right now because I have not been home or done anything different. People look at my age, or just all of these superficial things, right? So they're like, what? Like, you do this, or you're that educated, So again, people have overly looked at these superficial pieces of my identity. And because of that, they have looked over the fact that I have a brain, or that I'm a mom and responsible, or I don't know, that I'm not a fighter or something, I don't know, or whatever they associate with hoop earrings, right? So that's how I've felt, like, where people are looking at me a little bit too much, but undervaluing me at the same time. And yeah, that definitely makes me feel both too visible and invisible, because the things that I want folks to see and notice, they're not. And the things that are more about fashion and style, and not, the definers of who I am, people are looking at. So I can definitely experience this all day, of course, as an individual person, but hopefully y'all can share some things with me as well. So does anybody have any other experiences they'd like to share? Any one of these, doesn't matter. And just shout out, because I feel like I could talk like this too, so. Yes, please.
So I was talking with my friends, and one of the things that they mentioned is sometimes they feel overly looked at as, for their cultural identity, and I often feel looked over for my cultural identity, because people make an assumption that I'm white, or maybe, that I'm white passing, and so sometimes I feel like my cultural identity is sort of ignored.
Yeah, all day I feel the same. People don't know. Yeah, they look over my identity, cultural identity as well. Yeah, the same thing. Some people assume I'm also white or Portuguese or something like that as well. Yeah. So how does that make you feel when they don't see that?
Well, I think it makes me feel like, sometimes it makes me feel like I'm not enough, right? Like I'm not doing enough to proclaim who I am. And then sometimes I think it can also make me feel, it's a very vulnerable place to be, because I also get exposed to things that I would not have been exposed to if they knew who I was.
Right.
And so I've heard really hurtful things, and that's also really hard to take sometimes because it's like you hear what people really think
Sure.
when they think they're amongst their peers.
Yeah.
And so that can also just be really hurtful.
Right, right, very damaging. Yeah, I again experience all those same things as well. People not recognizing the fact that I'm Mexican, that I speak Spanish, and then they are saying something, and it's like, whoa, you know, and yeah, there's a lot of things with that. Thank you for sharing. Anybody else have experiences with any one of these questions? Yes.
I would say my social class.
Okay.
There's an assumption, me being middle class is relatively new. So I identify more with my students, in terms of lifestyle and experiences. And so when I'm in the academy, I feel like the faculty just make assumptions. So I feel like that's both ignored, and that sometimes I do feel like there's a spotlight on me, just the way that I carry myself, the way that I speak. I'm not all formal. And my social class had language and neighborhood come out, and that's something I'm very proud about. That I don't have to assimilate to their definition of professionalism,
Right.
and still be professional.
Right.
So I feel like it's both invisible and visible at the same time.
Yeah, and again, because I feel like I think I know who you are.
Yes.
So I know, being that I know your career, I could again also relate to that as well, right? The idea of what does a professional look like? What do they sound like? How do they speak? What do they wear? What's their class structure or whatever the case? And definitely, I get kicked out of that box, right? And so again, it's like proving the worth in that professional way, proving the worth in the Latina way or whatever, right? So yeah, I hear you guys.
Can I add to that? So like in my pedagogy, I'm very much about relationships. Well, in life, I'm about relationships,
Yeah.
development of relationships. And so a lot of times in class, we're having fun.
Yeah.
I prioritize fun. Learning should not be boring.
Right.
So whatever I want to share with them, I don't teach sociology. I teach students sociology.
There you go.
So therefore, I need to connect with students.
Right.
And so we'll do it in a way to be able to make their daily lives come to life. To be able to give them that language or what they already know, right? It was already innate in them.
Yeah.
And oftentimes me using a cultural understanding of my classroom where I'm centering them and having fun. Like we're having, the other day we played Loteria.
Yeah.
For me it was like, hey, we had to do an icebreaker. So let's play Loteria. Administration, other faculty oftentimes will kind of throw shade, be like, well, it must be nice to have so much fun in class. And you can feel those microaggressions of like, well, we do serious work over here.
Yeah, for sure. No, thank you for that. Again, I experienced that my next door neighbor, in the sense of a classroom, for years would come over and knock on, or actually just open the door and stare at me because we were just being too loud. And at that time I was like, oh, I don't want to, but then I finally was like, yes, you could use your words, and then ever since I kind of checked him or put him on the spot, he stopped. But again, I get it. It's like I feel like I'm doing something wrong if I am again decentering like that Western classroom, right, and putting it and really revolving it around my students. But anybody up here identify with any of these things? That's okay, we can move on. All right, hopefully you guys are at least thinking about them, right? A big part of what I'm about to talk about is all about how much reflection that we do as individuals, how much time we give to really reflecting on our own experiences, because as we will begin to find out, it's all about like how our lived experiences project onto others, and of course then it also translates into the lens in which we see others too. So again, we already kind of went through that. Well, actually, no. Well, actually, Miss Baru, sorry, put a child on Front Street right there. She kind of already said who made you feel this way, right? So the academy, the other folks that work around her, and I kind of explained the same thing. I'm also thinking about my colleagues, just general random people out in the community, who saw me like this, or, sorry, that should say think, but anyway, yeah, so we'll just go on to the next one. Sorry, I've been talking so long. I have to get these little breaks for water, but basically, I'm gonna ask you this. So reflect a bit on the types of populations of folks you have interacted with most of your life. So really think about that. Who have you been around, right? So in all of the ways. So who is it that you interact with more in terms of like an intimate, familial way, like in a private, at-home way? Who do you interact with most at work? Who do you live near? Who do you live among? Where do you shop for your groceries? Where do you shop for clothes? And think about those things. And you guys don't necessarily have to share, but I really want you to think about what your surroundings look like. Who they are, where they're from, the color of their hair, their eyes, their skin, what areas of town. So I'm like, okay, like what? Like stop the press, right? What the heck? I thought this was, like why is she talking to us about food, where we go shopping? Like why does she want to know, right? What does this have anything to do with any of this, what we're talking about? Well, I will tell you right here, okay? So psychobiology, basically, findings have said that our deepest emotions, like love, fear, anger, dread, grief, sorrow, it all comes from a place, like a visceral place, right? Inside of our bodies, within us. So this is the part of our brain that visceral reactions occur. It's, of course, a part of our complex system of nerves that connects all of those things. The brainstem, the pharynx, I don't even know if I'm saying that right, the hearts, the lungs, the stomach, the gut, the spine, all of these things, right? It's basically the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve connects all of the emotions that we experience in our body. It's all connected. So if you have a gut problem, you're just not feeling right, chances are it's that vagus nerve just tightening up and just not allowing your body just a release points to just feel a little bit more relaxed. But our vagus nerve controls everything. You kind of see all of the ways in which it plays a role in these major organs in your body. So of course, as it says here, the nerve is directly connected to the part of your brain that doesn't use cognition or reasoning as its primary tool for navigating the world. So essentially, you guys, it's like our non-thinking part of our brain. It's just, again, when people say, do you have a visceral reaction? It's not like, okay, stop and think for 30 seconds. Now tell me what it is. It's like the initial, what are you feeling right now inside, right? What is that emotion or what's sparking inside you? So again, how does this all connect with my initial questions, right? What's up with that, right? How does this all work? So basically, despite not intentionally feeling some kind of way towards our students, our non-thinking brain is going to do it for us. Basically, that's how it ties in. So again, we'll get to how, but our brain is automatically making or giving or creating a reaction towards the students in our classrooms, period. Well, instantly. So in fact, when meeting an unfamiliar person, such as a new student, our body scans for hundreds of clues that determine if we can relax in recognition or constrict in self-protection. So again, it's just natural. We don't tell our body to do this for us. It just happens. And to kind of go back to the very introduction Dr. McFarland gave me, so I've been a part of a program where all of our students, actually I should say, well, not too much anymore, but that's a different lecture. But a lot of the students that come to Modesto, that are newcomers from all over the world, they come to my high school, Davis High School, and they get English immersion programming through me. I am the program now. Unfortunately, it's just me. But anyway, what I say that to say is I'm consistently getting unfamiliar people in my class, new students, every single day. I just got 7 new students this week, 2 of which were in one period this morning, and Another one later today, sixth period, I'm consistently getting new folks all the time, coming through my door. So learning this years ago was extremely vital to just my practice and how I received these students, because even if it had nothing to do with them, 7 new students in 1 week is like, ugh, right? Like, oh my God, and it has nothing to do with them, it has everything to do with the workload or being tired, or you should see my desk. There's tons of papers everywhere. It's adding to that. But when I learned this, that my body is naturally just giving these reactions and projecting how I am feeling without even recognizing it, I thought I had to check myself, right? I had to use the humility, and I had to really be humble and sit with, okay, why am I reacting in so many ways? But again, that vagus nerve, without us thinking about it, is probing for clues on these unfamiliar folks to see if our bodies, if we can relax, or if we have to be fight or flight mode and jet and protect ourselves. So again, the part of this is we're consistently scanning for body size, posture, clothing, speed of approach, what the body is saying or doing. We are constantly looking for, feeling for their vibes, the folks their vibes, the types of expressions they're making on their face, everything. Oh, I copied that twice. Guess it must have been important. But a shortcut, really, that the brain gives us is basically asking ourselves, how closely does this body, this unfamiliar body, match our own, right? And so our bodies quickly determine how comfortable we can be or how tight we are, depending on how familiar that body looks or how closely they look to how we look. So circling back on some of my initial questions, right? Reflect the types, populations, or folks you've interacted with most in your life. Think about it all the ways. Where do you go shopping? Where do you buy your shoes? Who do you live next door to? Right? It's all connected. So basically, if you're a person who spent most of their life among fill in the blank people, Mexican people, black people, white people, Asian people, maybe a mix of bunch of different types of people, who knows, Central American people, right? How comfortable are you when coming into contact with new folks who do not look like you, speak your same language, wear the same clothes you wear, share the same religion, eat the same foods, come from the same country, etc. So again, if you're have only lived in certain areas, or if you're only vibing with certain people, or consistently go to one grocery store, or never leave a certain part of town, I mean, really think about how are you acting, or how comfortable do you really feel when you are in contact with somebody who is not the same, or at least in these particular ways, or share commonalities. So I'm going to show you a little bit about me, some personal whatever. This is my family. These are my twin daughters, my 9-year-old girls. I'm like, what are their names? Catalea and Oliviana. That's my oldest daughter, Lola. She's a cheerleader at Modesto High School. That's my family. My mom, who actually, so for her, very much white passing, Mexicana lady, speaks Spanish, will check somebody in a quick minute if they say something about any one of us in Spanish and they think that, she doesn't know. My husband is Japanese. There's my dad and my best friend Anna. That's us when we were little, so we grew up right next door to each other. She is Mexicana. Sorry. Miss Dr. McFarland mentioned that I'm also the state treasurer for United Black Unions of California, so we're the governing board for all of the BSUs in California. That's my daughter. We went to Santa Cruz over the summer for a leadership conference. That's one of my best friends, Krish Neal. A couple of my amigas from junior high. That's my dad and Oliviana at Lola's gang. These are some of my students, the immigrants, refugees, asylum seekers that I love and admire and learn from. Here's some more students right here. Just over the years. There we go. All of these folks in and out of my class. It's my class. classroom door. I so feel like this is like a 1980s like sitcom picture. Like, I don't even know, but I forgot the name of the guy. Like, he's like a professor, and he had I don't know, white hair or whatever. Anyway, I think he was like junior college. I don't know, but it just reminds me of such like a 80s photo, so I like it. So basically, all of these people have been a huge part of my life, right? They're my family, they're my daughters, my father, my husband. My daughters, I've also been around my daughter's father, a black man, and his family. So it's actually often when I think of family, I think of black people more than I do Mexican people, because I just spent the majority of my life with his family. I worked obviously with immigrants, refugees for the 16 years. Definitely fairly comfortable with a lot of different types of folks. But I'll tell you a funny story about those who I am not used to. Are white girls. I'm just not used to them. And a couple weeks ago, so all the students eat in my classroom every day, tons of students. They don't happen to be white though, but it's every other person on the planet eats in my class, but I just don't interact. Like, they're not my students. Not that I don't like them or anything, it's just I don't interact. That's just not my student clientele. I don't live among a lot of white folks. I live in the west side of Modesto, and there's where we are. It takes a long time to get to different grocery stores, so we kind of stay local. I shop online, like Amazon, whatever, right? So there's not a lot of interactions with outside of that world that I just showed you. So a couple weeks ago, during lunch, I had just advertised, for a BSU trip to Fresno State. And it was like a Saturday event or whatever, and then we were able to stay for a Fresno State football game. Well, there's two particular girls that were interested in going, and they walked into my classroom during lunch, and they happened to be white girls. And again, nothing wrong, I'm just not used to seeing them. And so when they came into my door, and I'm laughing, and not at them, but at the fact that all of us were kind of like what? Like, because again, my classroom is all immigrants, refugees, asylum seekers from, so yes, we have some students from the Ukraine, but majority is Central America, so El Salvador, Nicaragua, Guatemala, Iran, Lebanon, Iraq, Afghanistan, China, Vietnam, all of these places, but I don't have a lot of interaction. So when they came, it was almost like, what are you doing here? Like, what? Why are you here? Like, almost like, are you getting me in trouble? It's just really odd, right? And it is because I'm just not used to working with this population of students. So when they walked into my door, I could honestly say, and again, this is me modeling vulnerability in the sense of I'm having to process and check myself with who I'm comfortable around to model for you or my students, this is a process of, self-awareness. And so it was like, hi, guys, yes, do you know where you're at? What do you need? And, and I had forgotten completely about the trip that these two students might be actually interested in going. Well, they weren't after they found out it was a black event. And again, that's just their deal, but they left. But then after they left, all of us were kind of like, because them too, all of the students eating lunch are also not used to this population either, right? And so when they're in my room, they kind of are away from that, I guess. So when these girls come in, it really took us all back. It gave me a visceral emotion, and again, not of who are you? Why are you here? It was more like, what did I do? Did I say something wrong? What do they need? Oh my God, like that. And so anyway, that's the case. So it goes without saying then, right? That when my brownish body encounters unfamiliar brown and black bodies, I feel relaxed. But I constrict when I encounter unknown white ones. It's just the truth. In the same way, many white bodies relax when they encounter other unfamiliar white bodies, but constrict when they encounter unknown black, or I should add, brown ones. So if we think about that, right, and we settle in this, and we think about who are our teachers in the United States, 79%, basically, we might as well say 80, of the United States public school teachers are white. And because of that, one can assume that not all have come to know how to love the approximate 55% of non-white students in our U.S. public education system. Basically because their bodies are unwillingly recognize them as unfamiliar, period. So in the same fashion, the approximate 20% of non-white teachers, so that would include me, may not know how to love the approximate 49% of white students in their classrooms for the same reasons. And again, that's not going to be every non-white teacher, it's not going to be every white teacher, right? But we're just talking kind of in generalities and science and things like that. So basically, these findings indicate that without an awareness of one's central emotions and how we came to be socialized into the norms and values that scripted our life, there is no way to rewire ourselves in a way that allows us to blindly love our students. There's just no way. Because we're just going to constantly be, right? If we don't, again, really center ourselves and sit with ourselves to really unpack how we got to be in this place, whatever that is. So again, and I actually didn't finish this slide, but I wanted to basically put it out there. I have solutions, and in fact, I'll do a little, cheap little advertisement for a book that former Dean Heather Dean published or edited. I'm chapter 6. But there's some solutions in here, some ways in here that we can really try to work and unpack, our own self so that we can rewire ourselves, so that we can get to the root of our norms and values. But it is work, and it is a place of having to be humble to say, I have biases too, everybody, that kind of thing. But again, I want to put it out there, to you guys again, to kind of go away from, again, the Western, okay, it's all wrapped up and nicely, here are the answers. I want you guys to think about it, or even us together. What are ways that can possibly undo some of these visceral responses, or how can we unlearn the norms and values that have scripted our lives? Obviously brought on by the trauma-based tightness, and so on. What do you guys think? What are your thoughts? What can we do? And you guys, again, talk to your elbow partner, whomever, but let me know. Think about it.
Anybody brave enough?
I feel like if we familiarize ourselves with the cultures and the bodies, the people that we aren't familiar with, through friendships, through relationships, through research, and stuff like that, that could help alleviate some of the uncertainty we have biologically, not consciously, as you mentioned, but those visceral feelings. We could help alleviate that through the research, through educating ourselves of the cultures of people that not necessarily that we know, just to become more culturally sensitive.
Yeah, I love it, sure. Because again, if you're not familiar with certain folks, or so for example, had I never joined the Language Institute or went to Davis High School to be in this particular program, I don't think I would have ever interacted necessarily with someone from Afghanistan. I don't think they would have been in my pathway. I don't know. I mean, I don't know that for sure. But definitely, I just don't think so. But who knows, right? Who knows about life? But now I'm like, I know so much about the Afghan culture and so much about culture in Central America and stuff. And again, because of that, like because of background research that I've done, or even just asking questions of some of the people that work with us, yeah, it gave me a lot of different insight, and it allowed me to see them in a way that I might not have before had I not had like that background information. And just again, or context, right? The context to understand why the students do X, Y, and Z, or why they don't do certain things, and so on. So I think that you're right on, buddy. Yeah, just developing those relationships and consciousness awareness research. That's wonderful. Anybody else?
I don't think I can speak for mine. What I would say, what I would say is, I think, you know, what you said, sir, in terms of like that list of what folks need to do actually do the work.
Yeah.
But also on the same note is the same people that go to the same professional development.
Yeah, right.
So it's like talking to the choir.
Mm-hmm.
So I think one thing is we have to address power. Like we can be warm and fuzzy,
Mm-hmm.
but it's like, what are you willing to give up? Because equity means you need to stop hoarding power.
Right.
So people in positions of power and authority have to be able to do the work and then be able to sit with themselves saying, what am I willing to give up?
Yeah.
And listen to minoritized communities. And listen with humility and actually follow through. One of the things that I always experience is white people wanting to work with folks of color.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, okay, and I see it all, you know, okay. But when I've been in circles where I'm like, the last few circles that I've worked in, and they asked, we did a book club. I don't think they thought it was going to get as intense. But they said, well, what do you think we need? I said, I think you all need to work together. I think you need to go after your brothers and sisters. Instead of always aligning with folks of color who are doing the work, the reality is white people listen more to white people. I can't penetrate that. And so I really think that to be able to address the visceral, to be able to do the initial work, to be able to follow that list that you provided, very much so, and then to be able to say, what does equity really mean to me? It means that I need to not hoard power. And what am I willing to give up? And then when folks of color say what they need, like y'all need to work together, you know, like you get it, and this person wants to get it, and these folks don't want to get it. You need to go after your brothers and sisters, and then we can come together and work together. But y'all need to do your work.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah, so it's not just, I know oftentimes we hear like, that it's people of color doing this, right? And trying to promote the equity and do all of the things to push the wagon or whatever, I don't know that the statement, whatever, to push it forward. But in reality, we're not always the ones that need it the most, I guess. And like you said, like the people that are in this room now, sure, I'm glad that y'all are here because obviously we're all learning things together, but there is a slew of folks that should be here that are not. And so, yeah, and it's unfortunate because it's the same thing. Like they need, you know, there are folks that need to take responsibility and do their own set of work, you know. So I agree. I completely agree. Anybody else want to share? Yeah.
So I'm a little bit of an outlier. I'm not an educator,
Yeah.
but I am a parent of a child who
Hey,
goes to school,
yeah.
and then I work in mental health, so I work more one-on-one. But one of the things that I've noticed for myself is that I don't want to be around white people because it's exhausting, and I'm tired of the microaggressions, and I feel like my visceral response now is like I need to protect myself. And so, I mean, of course I am around white people. My son goes to a school with mostly white teachers, and they're lovely people, and I'm happy to interact with them in the ways that I need to. and I have neighbors who are white and all of that. You know, it's like I can exchange pleasantries and I can engage in like surface level conversations and all of that with my neighbors and the people around me. But when it comes to being vulnerable, when it comes to having people in my inner circle, it's much harder for me to do that. And I think I've reached a point maybe in my age. It's like I understand white culture. I've had to survive. Like I get it.
Yeah.
I've had to be tricultural, bicultural. Like I've had to understand. Like when I do talk with white people, sometimes and I say something and then they don't understand and I have to explain it and I get frustrated because I'm like, I know about your traditions. I know about how you know, I don't know everything about how your house looks like, but I know enough that like you don't have to explain basic things to me,
Right,
you know? And then that gets very frustrating and it gets very exhausting. And so I've just reached a point as I get older, as I reach middle age, where I'm just like, I just want to be in my bubble. I just want to cocoon myself in with the people that I feel safe with and just kind of get by everywhere else. And so as you know, someone who works with mental health and I think about the trauma and I think about those visceral responses, like I don't want to have that. It's not a trauma that I chose. It's not a response that I choose. But I don't know how to, and in an ideal place, like yes, I want to get over that, but like what people mentioned, right, like there are so many people who don't want to give up that power, who don't want to engage in that it's like, I don't know, I don't want to figure out who's there and who isn't. I don't know, that's just a lot of work.
It is. Well, it's yeah, you want folks to take responsibility too, or even recognize how they're making you feel unsafe or where that's kind of, and because I feel the same way. I really do. And I also feel the same way, unsafe sometimes around white folks. I feel like, to be very honest, we just changed my little girl's school. But when I send them to school, when I used to send them to school, this is literally just a couple days ago, literally, they just started new school Wednesday. But even when I send my oldest daughter into Modesto High, a school that I graduated from, my mom worked there, my very first year of our language institute was there, I feel scared sending her there. It has nothing to do with the students. It has nothing to do with the area. I live there. I'm right off of Martin Luther King Avenue. It has everything to do with the teachers. Because they have only proved to me that they do not see my daughter for who she is. She's the junior class president. She works her ass off at all of the events. She puts on proms, the winter formals. She's the one making all the banners for everybody. She's the varsity cheerleader. She's about to be captain next year. She's doing it. And yet, people don't see her for all of these wonderful gifts that she brings. They just see her as another black girl, period. And they have proved that in their responses to her, the microaggressions towards her. There's a couple particular teachers that, again, that visceral, like, I want to fight you. Like sometimes I can't even go to her football games where she's cheering because my husband and I were like, I don't know if we have it today. Like we're going to lose our stuff. And so again, it's like, okay, calm. There's that meditation, which what I'm about to suggest, and mindfulness that I have to practice because I don't want to be that way either. But after years of working with these marginalized populations, understanding their trauma, taking on their trauma, seeing how people have collapsed a program that was successful and really lifting them up, and just for no reason, that's like all these daggers, right? And then my daughter goes to school. My little girls went to Franklin Elementary, right around the corner from our house, but I had to take them there because they are the epitome of school to prison pipeline and how they do everything. I got one thing changed. Instead of taking a knee at the bell, now they do the Franklin freeze. But they have to still walk the line if they get in trouble. They can't speak when they're eating. They're like pushed like this. They can't really go to the bathroom if it's important teaching time. Their library is playing, like there's no joy in that school. And the teachers that we've talked to a couple different times for things, it's almost like we're doing your kids a favor for being here. And as much as we wanted to root for our neighborhood school, I'm not going to damage the spirit of my daughters, right? And so we put them somewhere else. But that stuff, right? That's a lot of trauma too, that over the years, I have come to be like, I could cry at a drop of a hat, because it's a lot of stress. It's a lot. And then, so again, how are we going to undo it for ourselves? How are we going to push these other folks, right, the people with the power to do it, if it's hard for us, right? But also, how do we do this in a way to save ourselves, I think, too, right? Because yeah, literally this year, I have recognized how much it's like hurting me, all of this, these systems that are severely oppressing Black and brown students. So kind of, some things that I wrote, I put in here. So again, not that, I don't get any money for this, and whatever. So this is literally just if you really wanted to do a deeper dive into, different experiences of a variety of types of teachers and their experiences. But in general, some of the things that I put in here in terms of solutions were to really just understand, again, our body's cognitive responses. And so here's just some books. Search Inside Yourself is a really good book. My Grandmother's Hands has everything to do with racialized trauma, the places that scare us, by Pema Chodron. She's a Buddhist monk. Actually, so it's funny, the post-traumatic slave syndrome, love it. I met her. That's a picture of a book I have that's autographed by Dr. DeGrue, because she's like, woo, love it. But again, these are just all of the ways that, again, as with us, I guess, being responsible, taking the time to read through to understand our own traumas, the traumas of others, and really get to the root of to ourselves and unpack ourselves. So just, again, another couple more books. Oh yeah, that's just something different. But anyway, yeah, there's a million solutions to unveiling or trying to get to the point where we can, I guess, just get rid of like these norms and these values that we've been socialized to believe. But it does take that mindfulness and really centering, sitting with ourselves and really getting to the root of who we are and why we do things, just so that we can be better people for those around us. Because again, when you deal with so many students, when you have the opportunity, I shouldn't say that, when you have the opportunity to work with students that are amazing and wonderful from all over the world. Like there's kids from El Salvador, Yemen, she's from Syria, she's from Mexico, Afghanistan, Mexico, El Salvador, Mexico. Like, when you get to be among a global, team or a group of kids, and you have these reactions, you're missing out on so many beautiful gifts that they can give you by way of their knowledge and experience and so on. And so again, my parents were amazing people, and they really exposed me to a lot of things. So working with this population, there was really never any sort of weird reaction. But over the years, I've just recognized how just really accepting students for who they are as they come is the best way to be able to connect with them. And just really just seeing, it's almost like seeing beyond their body, almost like as if they're translucent. So seeing their heart before I really figure out where their mind is and so on. As I really try to look at them as if they were my own children. I look at them like as a human. But anyway, I'm just gonna end with that. There's really nothing, I think, more to say. I feel like we had some good dialogue, but if y'all have any questions about anything, I'd be happy to answer. Or not 2, it's kind of late on a Friday. So I understand.
Thank you, Amelia.
Yeah, you're welcome. You're welcome.
Well, thanks for coming, and thanks to those who are virtually here. I used to mean something different. And we'll be here again in the morning. Lindsay Bird, a mentor of Amelia's and a predecessor of the language work that she's doing, will be speaking first. And then Amer will give us a little pedagogical excursion of sorts. And I'm looking forward to that. In the afternoon, we'll have some talks that focus on some of these immigrant communities and the very specific challenges that have been observed by those who have come to engage with them and not just watch them from distance. So thank you for coming.